Picture two men, two different services, both chasing a place in the most elite tier of the American military. The first is a Navy SEAL, already combat decorated, already through one of the hardest training pipelines on Earth, now standing in front of a board that will decide whether he is good enough for SEAL Team 6. The second is an Army sergeant nobody outside his own unit has ever heard of, walking alone toward a start line in the West Virginia mountains, about to be stripped down to nothing. Everyone assumes the SEAL is climbing the steeper mountain. The movies, the books, the legend all point that way. But look closely at how these two units actually build an operator, and a very different picture comes into focus. One of these pipelines asks a harder question than the other, and it is not the one you have been trained to admire. You know both names. Delta Force, the Army's secret unit at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, the outfit the whole world knows as DEVGRU. Two of the only true Tier 1 units in the United States, both working under the same Joint Special Operations Command, both capable of doing things almost no one else on Earth can do. They are usually spoken of as equals, two sides of the same coin. But the way each one chooses and builds its operators is not the same, and the difference is the whole argument. If you want to understand why the case can be made that Delta trains harder than DEVGRU ever will, subscribe to War Code. Because it starts with a single decision each unit made about where to find its men. Begin with the doorway, because that is where the two paths split. DEVGRU recruits almost exclusively from inside one community. Its candidates are seasoned Navy SEALs, men who have already survived basic SEAL training, already served on a SEAL team, already deployed to combat more than once. By the time a SEAL is even considered, he has been interviewed by a discerning board, his record pulled apart, his reputation checked across the teams. In other words, DEVGRU goes shopping in a store that is already stocked with nothing but elite operators. It is picking the very best from a pool that has already been filtered down to the best. Delta opens its door to almost the opposite. The unit recruits across the entire Army. Most candidates come from the Ranger Regiment or the Special Forces groups, but the call is far wider than that, and a soldier from almost any background who meets the bar can put his name in. That means Delta is not shopping in a store full of finished operators. It is pulling from a much broader, much rougher pool, and it has to do its filtering from scratch, with no guarantee that the man at the start line has ever been tested at this level before. The two units are solving the same problem from completely different starting points, and that changes everything about how brutal the filter has to be. Now look at what each filter actually costs. DEVGRU's selection course, the famous Green Team, runs for roughly 6 months under the constant eye of instructors, and its attrition is steep, often around half. A class can start with 20 of these combat-proven SEALs and graduate only about 12. That is a serious cut by any standard, and nobody should pretend otherwise. But hold it against Delta's numbers. Delta assessment and selection routinely fails around 9 out of every 10 men who attempt it, and it does that to a pool that is already supposed to be among the toughest in the Army. A trial by fire that eliminates 90% of hardened Rangers and Green Berets is a different order of savagery than one that trims half from a smaller, even more pre-selected group. There is a deeper point hiding inside that comparison. Most of the breaking that produces a DEVGRU operator happened years earlier, in basic SEAL training, long before he ever reached Green Team. By the time he stands in front of that selection board, the raw, soul-testing question of whether he can endure has already been answered once. Green Team is the polish on a blade that was forged somewhere else. Delta does not get to inherit that work. It has to do the forging and the polishing, both, inside its own pipeline, on men the Army has not yet stripped down to find out what they are truly made of. The unit owns the entire transformation, from unproven volunteer to finished operator, and it pays the full price for that in attrition. And the thing Delta is testing for is the harder thing to find. Charlie Beckwith built the unit's selection on the model he carried home from Britain's SAS, a model that hunts for the mind rather than the muscle. Delta's selection drops a man alone in the mountains, removes all feedback, manufactures total ambiguity, and waits to see whether he eliminates himself. It is not primarily a test of whether a man can shoot or swim or carry weight, because the Army is full of men who can do all three. It is a test of who he becomes when everything familiar is taken away. Building that test for a broad, unfiltered pool, and running 9 in 10 of them straight back out the door, is the part of the argument that is hard to wave away. Then comes the building itself. The men who survive Delta selection are not operators yet. They are raw material. What turns them into the real thing is the operator training course, a roughly 6-month gauntlet broken into distinct blocks, each one its own specialty. Marksmanship swallows an enormous share of it, with operators firing thousands upon thousands of rounds until they can put a bullet exactly where it needs to go while moving, in the dark, at any distance, without conscious thought. There are blocks for close quarters battle, clearing rooms, and flowing through buildings where a half-second of hesitation is fatal. There are blocks for demolition and breaching, for the precise use of explosives to open a door that is not supposed to open. The course is designed to take a man who passed a psychological gauntlet and turn him into a complete, thinking weapon. It is worth remembering what Delta was actually built to be. The unit was created in 1977 as America's dedicated hostage rescue and counter-terror force, the surgeons of the military, men who might have to enter a room full of hostages and terrorists and end the threat without harming a single innocent. That mission has no margin for error. It demands a level of precision under pressure that most units never approach, and it is why the close quarters battle and marksmanship standards inside that course are so merciless. An operator is not training to win a firefight in the open. He is training to make an impossible shot, in a fraction of a second, with an innocent life hanging on it, and then to do it again and again, until it is the most natural thing he does. That is the bar the operator training course exists to build, and it does not bend for anyone. There is also the sheer breadth of what a Delta operator has to master. Beyond the shooting and the breaching, the unit trains its men in advanced surveillance and reconnaissance, in covert driving, in blending into foreign cities, in the quiet tradecraft that lets an operator work in a place where wearing a uniform would get him killed. The unit was designed to live in the shadows as much as in the assault, and that demands a far wider toolkit than pure direct action. Building a man who is equally comfortable kicking a door and disappearing into a crowd takes time, and it takes a kind of training that never really stops, because the moment an operator's edge dulls, he becomes a danger to everyone beside him. If you have made it this far, you are already one of us. Cadets get every video 24 hours early, and a badge in the comments. The link is below. That obsession with training has a birthplace. In 1980, on its very first major mission, the unit watched the rescue attempt at Desert One collapse in the Iranian desert. 8 Americans dead. The operation, a smoking ruin, before the operators ever reached their target. Out of that catastrophe came a hard institutional vow that lives in the unit to this day. Never again would American special operators be sent into the dark underprepared. The relentless rehearsal, the obsession with coordination, the punishing standards, all of it hardened into the culture in the years after that failure. Delta does not train the way it does for show. It trains that way because it learned, in the worst manner imaginable, exactly what happens when an elite force is anything less than ready. And passing the operator training course is not the finish line either. Inside the unit, training is close to constant. Operators cycle through endless rehearsals, new skills, and live problem-solving between deployments, because the standards that got them in are the same standards they have to defend every day they remain. The pipeline that built them never truly switches off. It only changes shape, from a course with a graduation date into a way of life with no end, where a man is only ever as good as his last repetition. There is also a difference in what is at stake for the man who fails, and it quietly reveals how each unit thinks. A SEAL who does not make it through Green Team goes back to being a Navy SEAL, still one of the most respected fighting men in the world, his career and his identity intact. A soldier who fails Delta selection is sent back to his original unit with nothing to show for it. No consolation, no second tier to land in. Delta built it that way on purpose. The unit wanted men willing to risk everything they were for a chance at something they might never even be allowed to talk about. That willingness to walk to the start line with nothing guaranteed is part of the character the selection is hunting for in the first place. Think about the kind of man that arrangement selects for at the very first step. A successful Ranger or Green Beret already has a respected career, a tribe, and an identity he has bled for. To try out for Delta, he has to be willing to set all of that aside, walk into a selection that will most likely reject him, and risk returning to his old unit marked by a quiet failure. He does it for a unit he is not even allowed to name in public, for work he may never be able to describe to his own family. DEVGRU asks an enormous amount of its candidates too, but it does not ask them to gamble their entire identity on a coin flip in the mountains. Delta does, before the real test has even begun, and that gamble is the first thing it measures. Now, honesty matters here, because this audience knows the subject cold and will not tolerate a cheap shot. A direct ranking of which course is hardest is genuinely subjective. The two units draw from different pools, emphasize different skills, and bury most of the details behind classification, which makes any clean scoreboard impossible. DEVGRU is a devastating, world-class instrument, full of men who have done extraordinary things in combat, and nothing about this argument requires inventing weaknesses it does not have. This is not a claim that a Delta operator wins a gunfight against a DEVGRU operator. At that level, that question is almost meaningless. The argument is narrower and sharper than that. It is about the filter, not the firefight. DEVGRU takes men who are already proven, already elite, already combat tested, and refines them into something even sharper. That is an incredible thing to do. But Delta takes a far wider and rougher slice of the army and builds an operator from the ground up, using a selection so psychologically punishing that it fails 9 in 10 of even the hard men who try. Delta is not refining a finished product. It is manufacturing one from scratch, and the question it forces every candidate to answer about himself is, by that measure, the harder question to pass. There is one more thing the audience already senses, and it lives in the silence. DEVGRU, for all its brilliance, has become a brand. Its operations are written into best-selling books. Its name is everywhere. Its mystique is public property. Delta stayed in the dark. The unit guards its anonymity so fiercely that most of its operators will live and die without the public ever learning their names, and that culture of disappearing did not come from nowhere. It comes from the same place the selection comes from, a unit that decided, from its very first day, that the work matters and the spotlight does not. The quiet is not an accident. It is the same standard, expressed a different way. So here is the part worth arguing about, and I want the SEAL community and the serious students of this in the comments, not just the Delta loyalists. Strip away the legend and the movies and look only at how each unit chooses and builds its men. Delta takes the rougher pool, runs the crueler filter, and manufactures an operator out of raw army material, while DEVGRU sharpens a blade that was already forged. Tell me that is not the harder road. Tell me which pipeline you would bet builds the more complete operator, and tell me why, because this is exactly the argument these two units have been quietly having for decades. Official members get the parts that do not survive the public versions, the names and the details we cut before publish. The door is below.